The train creaked and groaned as it wound its way through the flat, sun-baked plains of Texas. Dust rose in gentle clouds from the rails, curling around the wheels and settling on the dry earth like a fine golden powder. Inside the rattling compartments, young German women sat in silence, their hands gripping the cold metal bars of the windows. Outside, the horizon stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of green and gold, dotted with distant trees and cattle grazing lazily. None of this felt real. After years of war, of bombs and sirens, and the constant hum of fear, the wide open spaces of Texas seemed like another world altogether. Among the women was Elsa, barely 19, with dark eyes that had seen far too much for her age. She pressed her forehead against the window, staring at the flat, seemingly infinite land. Memories of Berlin haunted her still. The rubble, the smoke, the streets lined with the wounded and dying. And yet, for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Hope. It was fragile, like a candle's flame trembling in the wind, but it was there. The train slowed, finally stopping at a small station far from any city. The doors opened, and a gust of warm air swept through the carriages. It smelled of earth and hay, of livestock and distant fires burning in farmhouses. The women hesitated, unsure how to step into this strange, sunlit world. Guards urged them gently, and one by one they climbed down, the gravel crunching under their worn shoes. They were not in Germany anymore, not in the cities bombed to rubble, not on streets lined with despair. They were in Texas, in the heart of a country they had only heard about in whispered conversations or through the distorted lens of propaganda. And yet, the vastness of the plains, the quiet dignity of the ranches, and the curious gazes of the locals made the women feel an unexpected sense of awe. The rancher who had come to meet them, a tall man named Mr. Johnson, wore a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his weathered face. His boots sank slightly into the dry soil as he walked toward them. He did not shout. He did not brandish authority like a weapon. He simply nodded. "You'll work with us," he said quietly, "but fear nothing. You are not our enemies here." The words were simple, but to the women, they felt like a lifeline thrown across an ocean of uncertainty. For years, every interaction had demanded caution. Every stranger could be a threat. And here, a man they did not know spoke to them with calm, almost gentle authority. Their first day was filled with labor that tested their bodies and patience. They learned to feed the cattle, mend fences, gather eggs, and tend to crops stretching farther than the eye could see. Blisters formed on their hands. Muscles ached in ways they had never known. Yet with each task completed, there was a sense of accomplishment, a quiet pride that warmed even the fatigue in their bones. Elsa struggled with a stubborn cow, her hands shaking as the animal nudged her. A young farmhand, Jacob, noticed her efforts and stepped forward. Without words, he guided her hands to the correct position, his fingers brushing hers in a fleeting, gentle touch. It was so small, so ordinary, yet Elsa felt a spark of connection that startled her. Evenings brought a different kind of work. The women gathered in their small barracks, sitting on wooden benches and sharing what little food they had. They whispered stories of home, of lost families, of friends who had vanished or been killed in the chaos of war. Tears fell quietly, mingling with hesitant laughter. Bonds formed slowly, stitched together by shared memories and the shared reality of being far from everything familiar. The land itself was an education. The sky in Texas seemed limitless, a deep, unbroken blue during the day, and at night a velvet expanse dotted with stars so bright they could almost be touched. Elsa often walked alone to the edge of the fields at sunset, letting the wind sweep through her hair. She inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of soil and grass, the freedom of movement, the strange, exhilarating openness of the world. "It feels like the earth itself is welcoming us," she whispered to no one in particular. Others began to notice the same sensation, the awe at the expanse of land, the peacefulness of the rolling fields, the gentle rustle of crops in the wind. It was as though nature itself was inviting them to forget the horrors they had left behind, if only for a moment. Interaction with the local Texans was cautious at first. Some regarded the women with suspicion, uncertain whether to treat them as workers or as prisoners. Others, intrigued by their resilience and grace, approached with curiosity. Mr. Johnson and a few of his closest workers patiently guided them through their tasks. He showed them how to calm a frightened horse, how to harvest cotton without tearing the fabric of the plants, how to navigate the sprawling property safely. It was slow, painstaking work. Trust was not granted, it was earned in small, deliberate steps. And yet with each passing day, the women began to see that not all men in this world carried weapons or malice. Some were simply human, guided by honesty, patience, and quiet respect. One evening, a small group of the women gathered near the fire, sharing stories and laughter with the farmhands who had stayed behind to help with chores. Words were limited by language, but gestures and shared experience spoke volumes. A joke here, a smile there, a gentle touch while passing a tool, all these small moments bridged the gap between two very different worlds. Life on the ranch became a rhythm that both grounded and challenged them. Work at dawn, chores throughout the day, meals together, and brief moments of rest in the evening formed a cycle that slowly replaced the chaos of war with structure. The women discovered the power of choice in ways they had not imagined. They could decide how to arrange tasks, which chores to tackle first, even how to prepare meals with ingredients unfamiliar to them. The physical labor brought unexpected rewards. Strength emerged where there had been only exhaustion. Skill replaced uncertainty. Each new task mastered became a small victory, a tiny affirmation that they could survive and perhaps even thrive in this foreign land. Even in these early days, friendships began to blossom. The women shared whispered confidences in the quiet of the barracks, laughing softly over small mishaps, comforting one another in moments of doubt. Bonds also began to form with the Texans, built not on obligation or hierarchy, but on mutual respect and recognition of each other's effort. Trust, fragile yet real, started to take root. The women had come expecting hostility, perhaps cruelty. Instead, they found patience, guidance, and unexpected kindness. And with these small gestures came hope, a hope they had almost forgotten, buried under the rubble of their former lives. As the days passed, Elsa and the others began to glimpse a future they had not dared imagine. The idea that life could continue outside the framework of war, that joy and connection were possible, slowly settled in their hearts. Though they carried memories of destruction and loss, they also carried the first tentative seeds of freedom. By the time the sun set each evening, painting the sky with brilliant shades of orange and purple, the women could almost forget for a few moments the world they had lost. Here, in the quiet of Texas fields, amid the rhythm of work and the warmth of new friendships, a new chapter of life was beginning to unfold. The train that had carried them across oceans and continents had delivered them not only to a different country, but to a possibility, a chance to redefine themselves, to find strength, and perhaps even, in time, to find love. For now, they were prisoners in name, In spirit and in heart, the women began to taste a freedom that was theirs to claim. The sun climbed slowly over the Texas horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. The earth, dry and fragrant, absorbed the light as if welcoming a new day. The ranch awoke with the lowing of cattle and the soft rustle of crops in the morning breeze. The women moved among the barns and fences, their hands learning the work of a world so different from the cities they had left behind. Fences stretched endlessly across the plains, demanding repairs. Horses, restless from the night, needed calming and feeding. Chickens clucked impatiently, waiting for their breakfast. Every task was both challenge and lesson. Learning to guide the livestock through the open pastures tested patience and strength. The land required attention, and in return, it offered rhythm and purpose. By mid-morning, the work shifted to the fields. Rows of cotton and corn demanded careful tending. Each movement, each step became a measure of adaptation. Labor was relentless under the Texas sun, yet it brought a strange sense of order, a counterpoint to the chaos of the world left behind. Hands became skilled and steady. Eyes began to recognize patterns in the fields, and muscles grew accustomed to the daily toil. Meals became markers of the day's rhythm. Cornbread and beans, fresh milk, and occasionally fried chicken filled empty stomachs. Eating together under the shade of the oak trees offered brief respite. Conversations were shared in bursts of English and gestures, laughter bridging the gaps where words failed. Stories of distant homes mingled with observations of the present, creating connections that were both fragile and enduring. Afternoons were for fences and barns. Wood splintered under hammers, and rope and wire were manipulated with care to secure boundaries that kept the cattle safe. The work demanded cooperation. Tasks that seemed impossible alone became manageable in pairs or groups. Understanding grew not only from instruction, but from observation, imitation, and trial. Each day added skill and confidence, layering competence over hesitation. As the sun dipped toward evening, shadows lengthened across the fields. Moments of quiet reflection came in the soft light of dusk. The sky stretched endlessly, painted with hues of orange, red, and violet. The wind carried distant sounds of life, a horse's whinny, the faint call of a cow, the rustling of leaves. These sounds became a lullaby of the land, marking the transition from labor to rest. Evenings brought gathering around fires or inside simple cabins. Hands rough from work were cleaned and rested. Stories circulated, mingling past and present, sharing losses and small triumphs. Bonds formed in these quiet spaces, strengthened by shared experience, laughter, and the understanding of mutual survival. Trust emerged not in grand gestures, but in everyday acts, passing a tool, correcting a fence post, or offering a smile. The Texans themselves grew more familiar, their mannerisms and rhythms observed and understood. Words, though occasionally elusive, became less intimidating. Gestures were interpreted, repeated, and imitated. Through work and observation, cultural differences narrowed. Shared labor created a space where nationality mattered less than skill, effort, and honesty. Time moved with the land. Each sunrise and sunset marked both continuity and change. Weeks passed and competence grew. Hands that had struggled with buckets and horses became adept. Fields were tended efficiently, fences repaired quickly, and chores completed with precision. The work shaped not only skill but confidence. Each day offered proof that adaptation was possible, and resilience became visible in every movement and action. Friendship and solidarity strengthened. Tasks once solitary were now shared seamlessly. Cooperation extended beyond necessity. It became rhythm, a dance of bodies and minds moving in tandem. Laughter arose from minor mishaps. A bucket tipped, a mule stubbornly refusing direction, or a wire tangling in the fence. Humor softened fatigue,
reinforced bonds, and provided light amidst relentless labor. Nightfall brought reflection on what had been achieved. The land, though challenging, offered rewards: a well-mended fence, a herd safely guided to pasture, a harvested row of crops. These accomplishments, tangible and immediate, carried weight far greater than any previous victories in distant, bombed-out cities. They were proof of capability and endurance. Trust between the women and Texans grew alongside skill. Hands offered guidance, smiles encouraged effort, and silent observation taught lessons unspoken. These exchanges, small but significant, fostered a sense of belonging. Work ceased to be merely obligation; it became a source of shared identity, a bridge across language, culture, and history. Amid the routine, moments of quiet observation became precious. The wide sky overhead, the patterns of clouds, the slow movement of animals, and the rhythm of wind through crops offered a meditative space. In this space, the past lingered but did not dominate. The future remained uncertain, but the present provided stability, comfort, and a sense of agency previously unknown. The women noticed subtle changes in themselves: hands roughened and skilled, backs strong from labor, and eyes attuned to the nuances of field and barn. Patience grew, along with awareness of others' movements and needs. Adaptation had begun to feel natural, and the land offered a form of education that combined endurance, observation, and intuition. Small joys were discovered in everyday actions: guiding a horse without struggle, harvesting a perfect row of corn, or completing a task efficiently. The shared laughter of missteps became part of the rhythm, integrating playfulness with duty. These moments, seemingly trivial, carried significance as markers of adaptation and emotional survival. Evenings continued to foster bonds. Around fires, stories and experiences were exchanged, connecting lives across oceans. Words often failed, but gestures, expressions, and shared understanding sufficed. The women learned to interpret and anticipate, creating unspoken communication that eased cooperation and reinforced community. With each passing week, the work became a scaffold for trust, skill, and belonging. The routines of ranch life provided stability, while interactions built familiarity. The environment, initially alien and intimidating, began to feel lived in. The plains, the barns, the fences, and the skies formed a world that, though foreign, could be claimed through effort, observation, and shared experience. By the end of the second month, competence was evident in every action. Livestock moved calmly under their guidance. Fields bore the mark of care and attention. Chores were completed with confidence and efficiency. Labor was no longer merely survival, it was mastery. Evidence that adaptation was possible and that the women were capable participants in the rhythm of Texan life. Amid this routine, subtle bonds began to hint at deeper connections. Small gestures carried meaning, helping with a difficult task, sharing a tool, or laughing together over a shared misstep. Though not spoken, these interactions laid the foundation for trust and emotional closeness, signaling the potential for relationships that transcended work and circumstance. The Texan plains offered both challenge and refuge. Labor demanded strength, patience, and collaboration, yet it also provided a sense of continuity, of purpose, and of achievement. In this environment, the women were no longer merely visitors or prisoners. They were part of a system that valued skill, effort, and honesty. Each day solidified their place, slowly transforming uncertainty into belonging.
The days on the ranch blended seamlessly into one another, each sunrise illuminating the sprawling fields, the long dirt roads, and the scattered oaks that dotted the landscape. The women moved with a rhythm that had become natural. Hands steady, eyes alert, muscles conditioned to the demands of the work. Livestock grazed quietly in the distance, the occasional neigh of a horse or lowing of a cow punctuating the stillness of the vast Texas plains. Life was no longer just a survival. It had become a series of small victories, moments of shared laughter, and fleeting glimpses of connection. Evenings brought a softer pace. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the fields in shades of amber and crimson. Shadows stretched lazily across the fences and barns, and the air cooled with a faint scent of wildflowers and earth. The women often lingered at the edge of the fields, brushing dust from their hands, listening to the quiet hum of the land settling into night. Conversation flowed easily now, punctuated with laughter and gestures, a language formed of shared experience rather than words alone. Labor continued to define their days. Tasks once unfamiliar had become routine, guiding horses through narrow gates, herding cattle across open pastures, repairing fences worn by storms and time. Each accomplishment carried a quiet satisfaction. Mistakes still happened, but they were met with gentle correction and patient guidance. Every completed task reinforced confidence, slowly dissolving the tension and fear that had once followed them from the world they had left behind. There were days when the work seemed endless. Fields stretched beyond the eye, fences needed constant mending, and the heat bore down relentlessly. Yet even in exhaustion, there was a growing sense of purpose. Every action mattered. Every step taken to guide an animal, every line of crops harvested, every barn swept clean was a tangible contribution, a mark of their presence and adaptation to this foreign land. Friendships deepened with every shared task. The women learned to anticipate each other's needs, to cooperate silently in the fields, and to offer support without hesitation. Shared laughter over minor mishaps, a bucket spilled, a fence stubbornly resisting repair, or a tangled rope, became a binding ritual, a signal of camaraderie and understanding. Trust, once tentative, grew with each day of cooperation and shared experience. Even the Texans began to see the women as more than prisoners. Patience, hard work, and resilience earned respect. Occasional smiles, helping hands during difficult chores, and small acts of kindness created bonds that slowly bridged cultural divides. The women learned the nuances of local life, the cadence of speech, the timing of work, and the subtle social cues that defined interaction in this new world. Meals offered moments of rest and connection. Under the shade of oaks or in the warmth of the cabins, food became both sustenance and ritual. Cornbread, beans, and fresh milk, simple yet nourishing, were shared amidst conversation that flowed effortlessly now. Language was no longer a strict barrier. Gestures, expressions, and laughter spoke volumes. Shared stories, some whispered in German, others in broken English, created a tapestry of experiences linking past and present, home and the vast plains of Texas. Evenings were also moments of reflection. The skies stretched above in vast, unbroken blue, fading to deep indigo as stars emerged. Wind rustled softly through the crops, carrying distant sounds of animals settling into night. The women often paused to take in the quiet, their minds drifting between memories of what was lost and the tentative hope of what might be found. The land offered both solace and challenge, grounding them in the rhythm of labor and the beauty of the world around them. As the weeks passed, subtle bonds began to form beyond the circle of friendship. Shared glances, the brief brush of hands, quiet laughter in the barns of fields hinted at the beginnings of something deeper. These were small, almost imperceptible gestures, yet they carried weight in a world where connection had been scarce and precious. Work in pairs or small groups brought these connections naturally, helping to guide a horse through a narrow gate, lifting sacks of feed together, or repairing a fence side by side created moments of closeness. Eyes met with unspoken understanding, smiles lingered longer, and laughter became an intimate signal of trust. Trust, once tentative, grew with each day of cooperation and shared experience. Cultural differences, once stark, began to blur. Meals, chores, and social customs slowly became familiar. Greetings, once awkward, were now exchanged naturally. Tasks that seemed insurmountable were now accomplished with ease and sometimes even enjoyment. The women began to anticipate the rhythms of ranch life, moving in harmony with the Texans, sharing knowledge and learning in turn. Small celebrations marked milestones in their adaptation. A fence finally repaired, a row of crops perfectly harvested, a horse calmed after stubborn resistance,
Each victory, no matter how minor, was shared with laughter, congratulations, and mutual recognition. These moments reinforced not only competence, but connection, laying a foundation for deeper trust and intimacy. The rhythm of work and life was complemented by moments of observation and quiet awe. Sunsets painted the fields in brilliant shades of gold, red, and violet, a canvas stretching endlessly. Stars, scattered across the vast sky, reflected in the stillness of ponds and silhouetted barns. In these moments, the past, the cities destroyed, the families lost, hovered faintly, but did not dominate. The present offered clarity. Effort, skill, and trust could create a life even amidst foreign lands and lingering shadows. Evenings often brought communal tasks and learning. The women taught each other techniques, shared tips on handling animals, and exchanged insights on farm management. Texans occasionally joined in, creating a space where knowledge flowed in both directions. These interactions fostered mutual respect, subtly reshaping perceptions and bridging gaps that had seemed insurmountable at first. With growing familiarity, the emotional landscape of the camp began to shift. Laughter was no longer cautious, smiles no longer fleeting. Trust, patience, and mutual respect permeated every action, every conversation. Bonds that had been tentative became steadfast, rooted in shared experience, competence, and the quiet understanding that each person was contributing to a larger whole. Amid these changes, subtle sparks of attraction surfaced. Not dramatic or overt, but quiet, almost imperceptible. A lingering glance while moving hay, a shared smile over a successfully completed task, or a gentle nudge during a minor mishap, these were the early signs of something more profound. The seeds of romance, fragile yet persistent, took root quietly in the fertile ground of trust and shared labor. Even the land seemed to participate in this transformation. Long walks along the fields, the scent of fresh hay, the rustle of crops in the wind, and the expansive sky created a backdrop that nurtured reflection, connection, and an appreciation for beauty amid routine. The women learned to read the subtle cues of the environment, moving with awareness and anticipation, both in work and in their interactions with others. Time, once measured in fear and uncertainty, now followed the rhythm of the ranch. Days flowed from labor to rest, from observation to interaction, from work to reflection. Each sunrise brought new opportunities for skill, understanding, and connection. Each sunset offered a chance to pause, to appreciate, and to integrate the experiences of the day. In this cadence, the women found a measure of stability that had been absent in the chaos of their former lives.
The sun rose over the Texas plains, spilling gold and amber across the fields. Dust swirled gently in the breeze, mingling with the scent of hay, soil, and livestock. The ranch awakened slowly, the lowing of cows and neighing of horses signaling the start of another day. The women moved through the barns and fields with the rhythm now familiar, hands steady and eyes alert. The work was still demanding, but it no longer carried the sharp edge of fear or uncertainty. Morning chores began with feeding the animals. Water buckets clinked against wooden troughs as the women carried them across the pens. Chickens scurried underfoot, and horses nickered softly, anticipating oats and hay. Every task was a lesson in patience and observation. Cattle had to be guided carefully through gates, fences inspected and repaired, and the crops tended with attention. Each action carried purpose, each completion a small triumph. As the women moved through these familiar tasks, a quiet awareness began to take hold. The presence of the Texans, farm hands and ranchers who had once seemed distant, was now a source of subtle connection. Shared glances over fences, the exchange of a smile during a difficult chore, the soft murmur of conversation while working side by side, all hinted at bonds forming beneath the surface of everyday labor. Lunch brought brief respite under the shade of large oaks. Bread, beans, and fresh milk were shared, and the women learned to anticipate the rhythms of each other's habits. Conversations flowed more naturally now, laughter punctuating the spaces between words. Gestures became familiar language, conveying encouragement, gratitude, or quiet amusement. The women began to recognize the comfort of these moments, small but grounding in a world that had once been unfamiliar and imposing. Afternoons were devoted to the fields. Cotton, corn, and other crops demanded attention. The work required coordination, careful movement, and endurance under the scorching sun. Yet amid the toil, subtle interactions continued to bloom. Hands brushing against one another while lifting sacks, sharing water, or guiding a horse side by side, created small sparks of intimacy. Eyes met in quiet acknowledgement, smiles lingered, and laughter became a shared language that transcended the spoken word. Evenings brought cooler air and longer shadows. The plains glowed with fading sunlight, painting fences, barns, and fields in shades of amber and crimson. The women paused to rest, wiping sweat from brows and stretching sore muscles. The wind whispered softly through the crops, carrying distant sounds of animals settling for the night. Moments of quiet reflection were shared silently, a mutual recognition of the day's labors, small triumphs, and evolve in bonds. Nightfall offered calm and intimacy. Around fires or inside the cabins, the women gathered, sharing stories and experiences without needing translation. Laughter and gentle teasing became common, the rhythms synchronized with the Texans who occasionally joined these gatherings. Trust deepened naturally and emotional connection strengthened. Simple gestures, passing a tool, helping with a difficult task, or sharing a blanket against the cool night air began to carry profound meaning. In the weeks that followed, affection grew in subtle, deliberate ways. Small exchanges, offering assistance without being asked, pausing to wait for someone struggling with a task, or a shared glance at the sky as stars emerged, carried significance. Bonds moved quietly from trust and friendship to something more tender, fragile, yet undeniable. The women felt these shifts without needing to name them, aware that connections were forming that could change the trajectory of their lives. Work continued to provide structure and opportunity. Morning and evening chores were now imbued with an awareness of these quiet bonds. The rhythm of the ranch, the rising sun, the grazing animals, and the steady flow of labor created a backdrop against which emotions could grow and flourish. Laughter, shared effort, and mutual respect created a space where intimacy could develop naturally. Shared experiences solidified connections. During a particularly hot afternoon, a stubborn horse refused to move through a narrow gate. Working together, the women and Texans managed to guide the animals safely, a moment marked by relief, laughter, and the unspoken acknowledgement of shared effort. Small victories like this repeated daily reinforced trust, mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding of care and reliance. As the days passed, the women became more adept at interpreting the subtle cues of the land and the people around them. The rhythm of labor, observation, and quiet interaction created patterns that strengthened the sense of belonging. The ranch, once a foreign and intimidating place, became a world in which effort was rewarded, connections were nurtured, and affection could grow unnoticed but undeniable. Evenings under the vast star-strewn sky became moments of quiet intimacy. Conversations, often light-hearted, occasionally brushed against deeper topics, memories of home, thoughts of family, and dreams for a future not yet imagined. The women shared laughter and occasional tears, comforted one another, and began to sense that life here, though unexpected, offered opportunities they had never known. The Texans, too, began to show signs of deepening attachment. Gentle guidance, patient teaching, and the occasional lingering glance spoke of appreciation and respect. The women noticed these small gestures and responded naturally, a quiet dance of awareness and subtle reciprocity forming between them. Bonds solidified not through words, but through shared experience, mutual effort, and an awareness of each other's presence in the rhythm of the day. Weeks turned into months. The work, once laborious and intimidating, became a source of mastery and confidence. Hands guided horses with a skill, fences were repaired efficiently, and crops were tended with expertise. These accomplishments, visible and tangible, mirrored the evolution of trust and connection that had developed among the women and Texans. Labor and intimacy became intertwined, each enhancing the other. Small, unspoken rituals emerged, waiting for one another in the fields, offering water or shade, or sharing a moment of quiet observation when the sun burned brightest. These gestures, though simple, carried weight. They were signs of emerging love, mutual regard, and understanding that transcended language. In a world that had once been defined by displacement and uncertainty, these moments were profound markers of hope and possibility. Even the land seemed to reflect these changes. The plains, vast and open, became a witness to the quiet evolution of relationships. Fields of cotton and corn, barns and fences, animals and wind all became part of the narrative, shaping and sustaining the bonds that were slowly, inevitably forming. The women and Texans alike moved through this landscape with growing awareness, attuned to both the work and the subtle signals of affection and connection around them. By the end of the season, the bonds were undeniable. Trust, respect, and affection had intertwined into relationships that promised more than mere companionship. The women were no longer just outsiders or laborers. They had become integral to the rhythm of the ranch and the lives of those around them. Love, tentative yet persistent, had taken root, nurtured by shared effort, patience, and the quiet intimacy of everyday life.
The dawn spread soft light across the Texas plains, spilling gold over the fields and wooden barns. The wind whispered through the crops, carrying the scents of earth, hay, and livestock. Life on the ranch followed its steady rhythm. Animals needed feeding, fences required repair, and fields demanded attention. Yet amid the daily labor, subtle changes were stirring. Quiet shifts that reshaped the air around the women and the Texans alike. The routines had become second nature. Buckets of water moved from troughs to pens with practiced ease, hay was stacked neatly in barns, and the horses, once difficult to guide, now followed instructions without hesitation. Work was no longer merely survival, it was mastery. And the sense of competence was mirrored in the growing closeness between those who shared the tasks. Subtle gestures had evolved into recognition of care. A hand offered to steady a ladder, a soft word exchanged during the guidance of a stubborn animal, a smile lingering after a shared success. These interactions carried weight. Eyes met with unspoken understanding, and small acts of attentiveness became markers of connection. The women, once strangers in a foreign land, were becoming entwined in the rhythm of Texan life in ways that exceeded work alone. Evenings became a canvas for quiet courtship. The sun dipped low, painting the fields in deep amber and crimson, shadows stretching across fences and barns. After the day's labor, women and Texans would gather near the cabins or around the fire, sharing meals of bread, beans, and fresh milk. Conversations flowed more freely now, punctuated by laughter and gentle teasing. The presence of others, once a source of tension, became comfort, and bonds strengthened in ways subtle yet profound. Workdays offered moments where courtship could unfold naturally. guiding a horse through narrow gates, repairing fences side by side, or hauling water together, created opportunities for shared effort and mutual reliance. A brief brush of hands, a glance exchanged over the fence, a quiet laugh at a minor mishap, all became part of a growing awareness, a soft tension that promised something more. By the third month, the patterns of life on the ranch had embedded themselves into daily experience. Fields were tended with precision, livestock moved smoothly under guidance, and chores were completed efficiently. The women were no longer outsiders. They were part of the landscape, their labor visible and valued. Texans had come to rely on them not only for work, but for presence, for the small yet tangible warmth they brought into the routine of life. The land itself seemed to reflect the transformations taking place. Sunsets, vivid and unending, painted the plains with hues of gold, red, and violet. Stars emerged, glittering across the vast sky, their presence mirrored in the quiet glances exchanged between people who had once been strangers. Even the wind through the crops seemed to carry a soft murmur, a rhythm that matched the growing intimacy and trust among those who shared the ranch. Small rituals became common: a shared cup of water, a brief pause to catch one another's breath after a long task, or a word of encouragement before tackling a difficult chore, became markers of growing connection. These moments, though ordinary in themselves, carried the weight of attention, care, and slowly blooming affection. The women and Texans alike became attuned to these subtle signals, learning to read gestures and expressions that spoke louder than words. As summer deepened, courtship became more visible. Walks along the edge of the fields, evenings spent near to the barns after chores were complete, and moments of shared laughter allowed emotions to unfold naturally. A hand resting lightly on another's arm, a gentle touch to steady someone over uneven ground, or a quiet smile exchanged in the fading light, all carried meaning, a language developed through experience, observation, and shared labor. Meals grew longer, more communal. The women and Texans often lingered at the tables or near the fires. Conversation flowed seamlessly from work to stories of home to hopes for the future. Laughter punctuated the evenings, and occasional quiet moments allowed for reflection and subtle acknowledgement of attachment. The women were no longer confined to survival. They were participants in a life that offered the possibility of partnership, companionship, and love. Evenings under the star-filled sky offered moments of quiet intimacy. Sitting near fires, observing the wide expanse of plains and sky, conversations would drift from the day's labor to memories of places left behind or thoughts of what lay ahead. Small gestures, a shared cup of water, a brief pause to catch one another's breath after a long task, or a gentle glance across the firelight carried the depth of trust and attachment that had been carefully nurtured over weeks and months. Courtship was often intertwined with work. The guiding of a horse, the repair of a stubborn fence, or the careful measurement of crops became occasions for subtle interaction. Hands brushed in passing, eyes met with recognition, and shared smiles offered reassurance and connection. In these moments, labor and affection were inseparable, each enhancing the other, shaping the rhythm of life on the ranch and the evolving relationships. Trust had become foundation. The women relied on Texans not only for instruction or guidance, but for support and understanding. Texans, in turn, came to appreciate the presence, effort, and attentiveness of the women. These relationships, built slowly and deliberately, extended beyond necessity into companionship, shared laughter, and the subtle intimacies of human connection. By midsummer, the bonds were undeniable. Affection was visible not only in small gestures, but in actions demonstrating care and consideration. Guiding someone safely through the fields, offering help without expectation, or sharing the shade under a scorching sun had become part of the language of attachment. Moments that once seemed mundane were now infused with significance, marking the evolution of friendship into courtship and subtle romance. The women adapted fully to the rhythms of Texan life. Daily chores were performed with skill and confidence, and participation in the ranch's work created opportunities to showcase competence, reliability, and resilience. These qualities were observed and appreciated, forming the backdrop against which deeper connections could grow. Shared labor created intimacy, trust, and respect, essential components of relationships in a world once defined by separation and war. Evening gatherings became occasions for observation and interaction beyond work. Stories of distant homes were shared, memories recounted, and laughter was a bridge between worlds. Silent understanding and attention to subtle cues developed naturally, allowing attachment to grow without force or declaration. The women were no longer merely present. They were part of the emotional fabric of the ranch, woven into its daily life and routines. The rhythms of courtship evolved slowly. A glance, a smile, a shared task became significant, each moment building upon the last. Subtle attention, care in movement, and patience allowed bonds to deepen without haste. Relationships developed organically, grounded in shared labor, mutual respect, and the intimacy that arises from prolonged collaboration and proximity. Work and affection intertwined seamlessly. Labor offered context for interaction, and moments of shared effort provided the framework for trust and intimacy. Whether guiding a horse together, repairing fences, or harvesting crops, shared experience became the foundation upon which attachment and emerging romance could thrive. By late summer, it was clear that lives had become intertwined. The women were no longer outsiders. They had become integral to the rhythm of the ranch. Texans had come to depend not only on their labor, but on their presence, companionship, and quiet influence on the atmosphere of the place. Mutual respect, shared effort, and developing affection created a delicate yet undeniable network of relationships that carried the promise of permanence. Evenings under the endless sky solidified these bonds. The plains, with their open space and vivid sunsets, offered a backdrop for connection. Fires crackled softly, animals settled into the night, and quiet conversation or shared laughter allowed the women and Texans to acknowledge the depth of their attachments. Trust, care, and mutual regard had blossomed into relationships that would endure beyond daily labor and seasons, rooted in shared experience and the subtle intimacies of life on the plains.
The Texas sun climbed slowly over the plains, spilling light across the fields and barns. Dust rose from the dry earth as animals stirred, moving quietly through the pens. The women had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the ranch, their movements deliberate and confident, hands skilled from months of labor. Horses followed their guidance without hesitation. Fences stood firm after careful repair, and crops bore the marks of attention and care. The land, once foreign, now felt lived in, and with it, the women's hearts had begun to settle into the subtle cadence of ranch life. Morning chores began as usual. Water buckets clinked against wooden troughs, feed was distributed with practiced precision, and the lowing of cows mixed with the occasional whinny of a horse. Each action carried purpose, and yet beneath the routine, the air seemed charged with a quiet tension, a growing awareness of connection and emotion. Hands brushed while moving hay, glances lingered while guiding livestock, and laughter broke through the heat of the day, lightening even the hardest labor. By mid-morning, the labor in the fields created opportunities for closeness.
Guiding horses through narrow gates, lifting sacks of feed together, or checking fences side by side allowed subtle touches and shared effort to weave a bond. The women had learned the nuances of the Texans' gestures and words, and Texans had come to anticipate the women's movements. Mutual understanding had become instinctive, a quiet intimacy that did not need verbal confirmation. The land reflected their emotions. The golden light of the morning sun bathed the cotton rows in warmth. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, and birds flitted along fences and barns. Amid the rhythm of chores, a shared glance over a well-repaired fence, a gentle touch while leading a horse, or a brief exchange of laughter over a minor mishap, carried weight. These gestures, small and ordinary, had grown heavy with meaning. Lunch brought moments of reprieve. Gathered under the shade of large oaks, the women and Texans shared bread, beans, and fresh milk. Conversations drifted naturally from work to memories of home to small observations of life on the ranch. Laughter punctuated the air, and fleeting glances revealed the growing attachment each felt. Hands occasionally met over a shared meal, fingers brushing against one another while passing utensils, and each moment seemed charged with anticipation. Afternoons demanded renewed attention. Fields needed tending, animals required guiding, and fences demanded repair. Labor intertwined with connection. Helping one another through difficult tasks became a natural extension of growing trust. A stubborn mule tested patience, yet working together to calm it strengthened bonds. A heavy load of hay carried in tandem was more than labor. It was a shared experience, a symbol of mutual support, and the unspoken intimacy that had developed quietly over time. Evening light transformed the plains. The sky glowed in shades of amber, red, and violet, stretching endlessly over fields and barns. The women paused to rest, wiping sweat from their brows, listening to the soft hum of the land as animals settled for the night. Shadows lengthened, and the wind carried distant sounds of life, the shuffle of hooves, the lowing of cattle, and the whisper of leaves. In these moments, the women and Texans found space to reflect, share small jokes, and acknowledge in quiet ways the connections that had grown in the rhythm of labor. Shared tasks became opportunities for intimacy. A hand steadied another while climbing a fence. Fingers brushed while untangling rope, and a smile lingered after a job well done. These moments, unnoticed by the untrained eye, held profound meaning, signaling attachment, trust, and the first stirrings of deeper emotion. Slowly, friendship had evolved into something richer, a gentle tension of anticipation and care that neither words nor deliberate action could fully describe. Nightfall brought the deepest moments of connection. Fires flickered near cabins, illuminating faces and casting warm shadows. The air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and hay. Conversations turned from daily labor to stories of childhood, memories of distant places, and dreams for a future that once seemed impossible to imagine. Laughter punctuated these evenings, but between the lines, quiet gestures conveyed more than words ever could. A hand brushing against another, a shared blanket against the cool night, and the soft acknowledgement of presence. The rhythm of courtship unfolded slowly. Each day of shared labor added a layer of trust. Each evening of quiet conversation added a layer of intimacy. Bonds deepened naturally, nurtured by patience and the unspoken understanding of mutual reliance. Affection, once tentative, grew strong without declaration. Its weight carried in gestures, glances, and shared experience. Over the following weeks, relationships became more apparent. Couples walked together along the edges of fields, paused in the barns to adjust a saddle or untangled a rope, lingered near a water trough to share a sip and a smile. Moments that were once routine took on significance. A laugh over spilled feed, a gentle touch to steady someone walking on uneven ground, or a glance shared across a field at sunset. The plain expanses, the barns, the fences, and the skies bore witness to the gradual intertwining of lives. The women, once wary and cautious, embraced the rhythm of both labor and emotion. Texans responded in kind, offering guidance, patience, and attentiveness that went beyond instruction. Each day cemented mutual reliance, and the subtle tension of emerging romance strengthened with every shared chore, every meal, and every evening spent near the fires. The land itself seemed to nurture these connections, vast and open, offering space for the quiet unfolding of love. By late summer, courtship had blossomed into a steady awareness of one another. Shared labor, attention, and quiet companionship had given rise to trust, respect, and affection. Hands that once touched only in work now lingered. Eyes that once met briefly now held each other, and laughter carried unspoken messages of care. The women were no longer outsiders. They had become part of the rhythm of the ranch and the hearts of those they worked alongside. Even the simplest moments held significance. Passing water, steadying a horse, sharing the shade under the blazing sun, or laughing over a minor mishap had become a language of attachment. Every interaction carried meaning, and with each passing day, these bonds grew more profound. The women in Texans had found a delicate balance between labor and intimacy, trust and affection, shaping a life that was both challenging and deeply rewarding. The plains themselves seemed to celebrate these transformations. Sunsets painted the horizon in brilliant hues, stars filled the sky, and the quiet night carried the hum of animals and the whisper of the wind. The ranch, once a place of labor and survival, had become a stage for lives entwined, where work and romance coexisted seamlessly. Each day strengthened the foundation for enduring connection, and each night offered reflection, anticipation, and the quiet joy of shared experience. By the end of the season, decisions loomed. The women had learned to navigate the land, labor, and relationships, and Texans had come to depend on them not only for skill but for companionship. Love had emerged naturally, slowly, in the spaces between chores, laughter, and quiet evenings. The bonds were strong. Hearts had grown attached, and decisions had to be made about the futures that stretched beyond the ranch and into a world that once seemed impossible to imagine.
The Texas sun rose slowly over the endless plains, casting its golden light across the fields, barns, and fences. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of hay, soil, and distant livestock. Life on the ranch moved in a steady rhythm. Horses nickered softly, cows stirred in their pastures, and the wind whispered through the tall grasses. The routines of feeding, tending, and repairing were well practiced now. Each action performed with precision, care, and a quiet familiarity that had grown over months. The women had become integral to the life of the ranch. Their hands guided horses with ease, repaired fences with skill, and tended crops with confidence. Each day brought the satisfaction of labor completed and the quiet acknowledgement of trust earned. But the rhythm of work now carried a deeper significance. For alongside mastery of the land had come enduring bonds, friendships, and love that had grown in subtle, persistent ways. Sunsets stretched long over the plains, painting the sky in fiery reds and soft purples. In these moments, the women often paused to take in the vastness, feeling the weight of choice pressing gently on their minds. Life in Germany was a memory, distant and fragmented. Here, amidst fields, animals, and people who had become family, there was a sense of belonging that had been absent in the world they had left behind. Courtship and affection had matured. Small gestures that had once been fleeting, a touch of the hand, a shared smile, had become deliberate, cherished, and understood. The Texans, patient and steady, demonstrated care through guidance, shared labor, and attention.
Moments of quiet companionship grew longer, more meaningful. Walks along the fields, evenings by the fire, and shared meals became stages for connection, trust, and the blossoming of love. Decisions loomed quietly but insistently. Letters from home arrived sporadically, bringing memories of a world far away. Friends and family awaited, expecting return, forgiveness, or reunion. Yet the women now faced a life that had grown beyond expectation. Bonds formed through months of labor, laughter, and shared experience had created ties that were difficult to sever. They stood at a crossroads where the past beckoned, but the future offered something entirely new. One by one, choices were made. Conversations around evening fires, long walks in the fading light, and moments of quiet reflection revealed intentions and emotions. Trust and affection had evolved into commitment. The women began to imagine a life intertwined with the Texans they had come to know, a life shaped not by fear or displacement, but by mutual respect, partnership, and love. Weddings were simple, reflective of the life that had grown naturally from months of shared work and experience. The plains bore witness to the unions, the barns and fences silent companions to vows whispered in the evening light. Friends who had labored alongside the couples attended, sharing in the quiet joy of beginnings, forged through endurance and trust. Families of both Texans and women, when they arrived, marveled at the unusual yet enduring bonds that had formed in this remote land. Life on the ranch continued, now enriched with deeper meaning. Daily chores were shared with greater ease and understanding. The land, which had once been a challenge, became a nurturing canvas for the lives that had chosen to remain. Love, respect, and partnership intertwined with labor, creating a rhythm that was both grounding and expansive. Children would eventually run through the fields, following in footsteps shaped by skill, care, and the quiet legacy of determination. Evenings retained their magic. Fires flickered, stars glittered across the vast sky, and the plains whispered in wind and rustling crops. Laughter, conversation, and gentle companionship filled cabins, marking the continuation of a life that began with uncertainty and toil. Bonds once fragile had matured into enduring relationships rooted in trust, mutual effort, and shared experience. The women who had arrived as prisoners found freedom in this life, not through escape but through choice. They discovered belonging in labor, joy in connection, and love in moments both grand and subtle. The Texans who had once been distant became companions, partners, and family. Together they built lives that transcended circumstance, transforming displacement into home, labor into mastery, and trust into enduring affection. As the sun set over the Texas plains, long shadows stretched across fields and fences, painting the land with the warmth of the day's end. Life continued in its steady rhythm, shaped by labor, connection, and love. The plains had witnessed hardship, adaptation, and growth. Now they bore witness to new beginnings, choices made with courage, and a life intertwined with the land, its animals, and the people who had become family. The horizon, endless and luminous, promised more than survival. It promised belonging, love, and the quiet certainty that the past, though never forgotten, could coexist with a future shaped by deliberate choice, enduring affection, and the steady rhythm of life on the Texas plains.